You're in 2057. The world is quieter now. Not peaceful, just filtered, smoothed out, sanitized, until even the past feels like fiction. But somewhere out there, under dust, behind glass, inside you, the old world still waits, the world before. Tonight we're going to find it, piece by piece, memory by memory. All you have to do is listen. So before we begin, take a moment to like this video, subscribe if you enjoy what I make here, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is right now. I love knowing who's out there walking with me, even in the quiet. Ready? Let's remember what we were, before we forgot. The silence after everything. You don't wake up with an alarm anymore. That ended years ago, when the need to be anywhere by a certain time quietly disappeared, like puddles after a dry wind. The house wakes first. The walls shift from dark grey to a pale gold. Your ceiling stretches a little higher. The light curves a little warmer. The temperature adjusts to what it thinks your body wants before your thoughts have caught up. It's been trained. Your home, trained to be gentle, because the world outside it isn't, not loud, exactly. Not anymore. The opposite, the world by 2057, has gone silent in all the places that used to sing. The cities don't hum like they used to. The roads don't buzz. The skies don't rumble. Silence isn't just something you notice, it's something you live inside of now like air. You stretch your arms, not because you're tired, but because movement reminds you that you're still here. Still in this body, still occupying space in a time that's grown thin at the edges. Your window lights up. Not with glass, of course. Glass was too breakable, too honest. What you see is a screen, one you forgot to turn off, still set to sunrise over pines, autumn edition. It's soft, gold-tinged, with wind that never moves the same branch twice. You know it isn't real. You know those trees were filmed over 20 years ago, somewhere in the west before it burned. But still, it's beautiful. You watch for a while. It's what people do now. Watch. Wait. Remember, almost, you've learned to enjoy the quiet, even though it was born from loss. Not a single loss, not a single day, but a long, slow unraveling that started before you were even born. An unraveling no one could stop, though many tried, and some still whisper that it might yet be stitched back together, but you know better. The unraveling made a sound, not a roar, not a cry. It sounded like silence, coming early, like an empty playground, a bus stop with no footprints, the space between the last raindrop and the realization that rain isn't coming back for a while. You run your hand across the wall beside your bed. It warms slightly beneath your touch. It knows you're here. You wonder if it remembers the version of you from yesterday, the one who asked to listen to birdsong while cooking, the one who fell asleep, asking the machine to tell a story about oceans. Oceans. You've never seen one. You've seen water. Yes, in carefully filtered systems. In the system beneath the housing unit. In photos, always flat, always still, always described in past tense. But the ocean, the real kind, the wild kind, the one that made noise and carried smell, that's part of the before. A word people use like a spell, or a wound. The before, everyone says it like it's just out of reach. A memory on the edge of someone else's dream. You can't remember it clearly, because you weren't there. Not really. You were too young, or not born, or born too late. Or maybe it never really was. But still, in the quiet, your mind drifts toward it. What did it sound like? That world before the silence. Before the systems ran everything, and everyone ran out of places to run to. You stand. Your feet meet the same floor they always do. Soft, smooth, temperature regulated. There is no urgency. There hasn't been for years. Not since the last alert was issued. Not since the towers stopped broadcasting. Not since the final settlement borders were drawn, and no one had the heart to redraw them. There are fewer people now, not gone, just distributed, thinned out like soup in a time of rationing. Your neighbors exist, but you've never met them. Their names in the system, icons on the building schematic, each one alone, each one with their own carefully balanced space, soundproofed and protected, just like yours. Community is a word that feels too wide, but you still wonder who they are. If they too wake without alarms, if they ask the walls questions about the past, if they've ever seen a tree that wasn't filmed or programmed or pixel grown in a dome. The machines keep everyone calm. That's the point. No more panic, no more running, no more protests or press conferences, or angry crowds demanding what no one could give. Now there's routine, softness, simplicity. You breathe in. The air is clean, purified, balanced, quiet, too quiet. And somewhere inside that silence, you wonder, maybe just faintly, maybe for the thousandth time, what it would feel like to remember something that no one talks about anymore, something that once made the world loud and alive and full of color, something you think they used to call life. What the screens forgot to show. The screen still flickers, that same forest loop, the same 10-minute stretch of evergreens kissed with amber light, and a breeze that doesn't exist. The kind of breeze that could lift the edge of your sleeve or rustle a paper in someone's hand. But nothing stirs. Not even your breath. If you stay still enough, you don't know where the footage was taken. No one does anymore. Maybe it was British Columbia, or Norway, or somewhere invented by an AI trained on 1,000 photos of comforting landscapes. The file is labeled Pinewoods_Light05, one of hundreds, carefully curated, barely different, endlessly looping scenes of serenity. But serenity isn't memory, and the longer you stare at it, the more your mind slips. There's something missing, not just from the loop, but from the feeling it's trying to give you. The light's perfect. Yes, the colors soft, the trees swaying like they know they're being watched, but nothing moves outside the frame. There's no squirrel darting by, no airplane trail above the trees, no insect landing briefly, then gone. There's no chaos, no surprise. That's what the screens forgot to show. Surprise, the friction of real life, the uncertainty, the clutter, the blur of motion too fast or too strange to be predicted. You're old enough to know what the world looks like when it's too clean, too careful. It means something's been taken away. You tilt your head. That same feeling again, like you've seen this exact frame before, not because it's on a loop, but because your brain already expects it. The next tree sway, the next shift in sunlight, the exact moment the leaf flutters down and vanishes before hitting the ground. You've watched this file at least 24 times in the last year. It's calming. That's what the machines want. Peaceful content, low variance stimuli, visuals that keep the heart steady, the mind gentle, the anxiety low. But it's not real. What it wants to be is memory. But memory has noise, mistakes, light flaring in the wrong spot, the shadow of your thumb in a photograph, your voice caught mid-laugh in a wind-blown video. The screens never include those. They don't let the world be ugly, or unpredictable, or too real. You tap the corner of the display, swipe through the presets, sunset over waterfall, morning fog in meadow, urban garden at night, each one a whisper of what a place once was, now compressed into flawless digital calm. You wonder who filmed them. Was there someone holding a camera, really there in the moment? Did they step on pine needles and feel them crack? Did they smell sap and frost, or was it all rendered, built from data, layered with algorithmic birdsong, given the shimmer of realism, without the truth underneath? Once you read about something called smog, a kind of air that made it hard to breathe in cities, that made the sun burn red, and the sky fade to brown. It sounded awful, but it sounded real. You close your eyes. Try to imagine a world where wind wasn't programmed, where smells weren't sprayed from vents, where someone could leave the house and not know exactly what the light would look like at 3:17 p.m., where you could step into the street and not be alone. The screens don't show people anymore. Not really. Too much emotion. Too many questions. Every face tells a story, and stories make people ache. That's the other thing they forgot to show. Other people. No children running through the forest. No dogs chasing sticks. No laughter echoing down a mountain trail. Just quiet, beautiful, perfect emptiness. Because people, it turns out, are hard to control, hard to flatten into comfort. They remind you of who you used to be, of who the world used to be. You switch off the screen, the wall dims, silence returns, not as punishment, but as design. And for a moment you wonder, if the screens forgot to show the people, maybe it's up to you to remember them, even if just in pieces, even if it hurts, even if all you have left is a story with no picture, and a memory that might not have been yours. The voice that only spoke at night. It began like so many things in 2057 do, quietly, without explanation, and long after you'd stopped expecting anything new. At first it was just a sound you didn't recognize, a whisper at the edge of the dark, threaded between the system hum and the soft pulse of your regulated air. Not an alert, not music, not the usual polite tone of the AI checking your hydration levels. This voice didn't follow protocol. It didn't announce itself. It simply began, you were half asleep the first time. Maybe dreaming, maybe not. You remember thinking, who's speaking? Then you waited, still, cautious, unsure if you were imagining things. The voice returned, a woman's voice. Older, human. And then she told a story, not an official archive, not one of the licensed entertainments or pre-cleared memories the system feeds during emotional management cycles. This was raw, tangled, a little cracked around the edges, a story not meant to be preserved, just remembered. She spoke of things no one had spoken of in years. A train platform, foggy in the morning, the rattle of a paper cup between her palms, a scarf tugged tighter against the wind, and a dog, muddy, friendly, licking her hands while someone laughed just out of frame. You sat up. You weren't supposed to hear this. No one was. This wasn't in the system. This wasn't part of your feed. You checked the screen, still dark. The wall hadn't lit up. The AI made no acknowledgement, but the voice continued. Every night, just past the hour when sleep settles but before dreams begin, she would return, a soft thread unraveling in your quiet room. She spoke about toast once, real toast, with butter that melted too fast and a kitchen that smelled like it had history. She spoke of music that came from wood and string and lungs, not circuits. She spoke of losing things and finding them again, not in backups or cloud logs, but in drawers and pockets and people. You never heard her name, never learned where she was. Maybe she was real, maybe a ghost in the system, a flicker of someone's memory lost and looping, maybe just your own need, inventing her. But still, she spoke, and you listened. Because the world around you didn't speak that way anymore. It corrected, it reminded, it instructed, but it didn't remember, it didn't ache, it didn't confess. Only she did, only at night, and only in that voice, quiet, cracked, unapproved, did you finally feel like someone else remembered the world before, even if it was only a story, even if it ended the moment you opened your mouth to ask who she was. A window that lied so softly. The window glowed the way it always did. Soft amber light, thin streaks of passing clouds, the hint of a breeze rustling leaves that would never fall. It was beautiful, in the way a lie can be. If you stare at it long enough, you knew it wasn't real. You told yourself that every morning, and still, it worked. You'd wake and think, nice weather today. But the weather didn't happen here anymore. The window wasn't a window. Not really. Just a wall-length display programmed to match a variety of peaceful environments. You could select coastal overlook, or alpine dawn, or field with bees. The bees were optional. Most people chose neutral sky. It made things easier. Predictable. This morning, it was late summer, wind option low. There was something deeply comforting in how it looked. The warm light filtered through imaginary clouds, the motion so gentle it barely registered, unless you stared. And yet, the longer you watched, the more you felt it. Not what was there, but what wasn't. There were no birds, no planes passing overhead, no insects streaking across the air, no kids running just out of view, no smell of grass, no sound of a car engine somewhere far off. The view was perfect, too perfect. A stage without actors, a world paused, not living. When you were younger, you believed in it. The glass, the air, the tree that never dropped a leaf. You'd even open the window panel sometimes, back when that was allowed, and place your hand into the narrow alcove. But there was nothing on the other side, just a sealed gap and the hum of systems pretending. It had been over a decade since you'd seen a real sky, a real anything. You weren't even sure the horizon looked like that anymore. Did clouds still gather like ships on the edge of the sea? Did the sun still hit rooftops and glint off windows and make shadows that moved across faces? Or had the world changed shape? Gone dim, grey, collapsed inward. You touched the frame, cool, solid, too solid. A border between you and something you barely remembered. The lie was kind though. It never demanded belief. It just waited, calmly, for you to look again. And you always did. Because even a lie, when repeated gently enough, becomes the shape of comfort. That window, it didn't show the truth, but it showed what the truth used to feel like. And that, in 2057, was sometimes all you needed to survive the day. The folder labeled before, you didn't find it on purpose. It was buried deep in the system, past menus you hadn't opened in years, beneath update logs and diagnostics and archived memory cleanse prompts. You had been trying to delete an old calendar event, something about vitamin resupply, and you clicked one layer too far down, and there it was. Before. Just that. No icon. No date. No explanation. A folder. Labeled in the system's default font, in lowercase, like it wasn't meant to be important. But something about it stopped you, before. A word everyone used but no one explained anymore. A word spoken with both reverence and regret. Sometimes used as comfort, sometimes as a warning. The time before everything changed. Before the silence. Before the systems. Before now. You hesitated. Just a moment. Then you opened it. There were videos. Dozens. Some with titles like Dad Grilling 2041, Elias's Last Beach Day, Blackout in Paris, Train Station, Everyone Running. Others had no names, just timestamps, compressed footage from street cams, voice messages, static-filled recordings, a child crying, laughter in the background, someone running through rain, and then images, some sharp and staged, some blurry, clearly caught mid-movement. You saw faces, real ones, imperfect ones, people who didn't look optimized or filtered, a woman with smeared eyeliner and a smile too wide, a man missing a tooth, holding a cat that clearly didn't want to be held, a group of kids in Halloween costumes made from cardboard and kitchen foil, a highway flooded with cars, bumper to bumper, horns and chaos and motion. You kept scrolling. You shouldn't have. This wasn't your folder. It belonged to whoever used this living unit, before it was reassigned. But the system hadn't wiped it. Maybe someone let it stay. Maybe someone forgot. Maybe someone wanted it to be found. At the bottom of the list was a file called simply, Look. It was a compilation. Someone had stitched it together, roughly, with timestamps and little captions in clumsy handwriting. First time snow, one read, as a boy stumbled laughing through thick drifts in a city street. She said yes. Above a video, where two people embraced in a crowd, surrounded by clapping. Before the last summer, on a scene of golden hills rolling under an open sky, kids tumbling down them, shouting things the mic didn't catch. And then one entry that made your breath hitch. This was normal. It showed a grocery store. Just that. Rows of vegetables, people comparing onions, a toddler screaming in a cart, a song playing overhead, something with lyrics and a beat that belonged to a different decade. The camera slowly turned, and the person filming whispered, "Look at all of them. Together, breathing the same air. Not even thinking about it." You didn't cry. You sat very still. You watched it 3 times. Then you closed the folder. But it didn't close inside you. You kept thinking about the word. Before. Not a time. Not anymore. Now it was a myth. A maybe. A mirror that showed just enough to hurt. You didn't tell the system you had found it. You didn't log an error report. You didn't say anything. But later that night, when the screens dimmed and the lights settled into their evening hues, you whispered that word again. Before. Just to see how it felt in your mouth. It felt like a door you might still want to open, even if the world on the other side no longer existed. When roads became maps, there was a time when roads were places, not paths on a screen, not suggested routes in a nav thread, not silent blue lines you traced with your finger on the glass, just to feel like you'd gone somewhere. Back then, roads meant something. You could stand on one and feel direction, north behind you, south, unfolding in front of you, like a story waiting to be told. Every turn had a choice. Every fork had a question. Roads didn't just connect points, they carried meaning, they made memory. But somewhere along the way, between the lockdowns, the border freezes, the endless redesign of the world for optimization, roads stopped being destinations. They became references, coordinates, data. Maps stayed, but travel, that was another matter. You remember finding an old street map once, paper, creased from folding, faded where fingers had touched it too many times. It had a corner ripped off, probably the part with the key, but even incomplete, it felt more alive than any route uploaded to your system. It had mistakes, scribbles, circles, drawn in pen, best cafe, next to an alleyway, a smudge near a park with no label. You stared at it for a long time, not because you needed to go there, you couldn't, not anymore, but because someone had walked those streets, made those turns, waited at that exact intersection when the light took too long to change. They'd leaned against that brick wall, fed pigeons from that bench, called someone from that corner, in the rain. They'd lived there, not watched it, not streamed it, lived it. You tried tracing the path with your fingertip. The lines felt oddly warm, like holding a memory someone left behind without meaning to. The system had road data, of course, up to date, efficient, projected overlays, routes designed for drones and supply runs and emergency evac, but nothing you could touch, nothing that remembered the sound of your shoes on pavement, or the way dust curled up behind your steps, or the silence that comes when you walk at dusk and there's no one else for miles. When roads were real, people got lost. That was part of the point. You could follow a road without knowing where it ended, and that was the wonder. Now, getting lost was a system error, and still, you kept the old map, slipped it into your bedside drawer, not because you'd use it, but because it whispered something the system couldn't say, that the world had once been open, that you had once gone, and that maybe, somehow, the map was waiting for your feet to remember what the road used to feel like. A city you never walked in. You've seen it 100 times, from above. In recordings. In photographs carefully labeled with year and weather and data points. A city, not yours. Not one you ever set foot in, but one that lives in your head anyway. Strange, beloved, half real. You first saw it in a saved documentary stream, years ago, when the archive was still open to public access. No narration, just a slow pan of streets, cracked sidewalks, tangled power lines, open-air cafes where people sat so close their elbows touched. The camera didn't try to impress. It drifted, aimless, through alleys and avenues, past laundromats, past newsstands selling real paper, past the man playing accordion near a stairwell worn smooth from footsteps. You watched the clip so many times you could walk that path in your mind. Even now, you know where the chip tile is, on the 4th step down into the subway entrance. And yet, you've never been there, never even been outside your assigned region. But something about that city, its messiness, its noise, its contradictions, felt like something the present had lost and couldn't grow back. It wasn't clean, it wasn't safe, it was alive. That was the difference. Now when you see cities, they're rendered, controlled, measured to within a decimal of movement, with population spread graphs and surface temperature stats at the ready, no surprises, no strangers, just glass and metal and signs that no longer say walk, because no one really does anymore. But that city, the one you never walked in, was full of choices. Every street a question, every corner a conversation. You could turn left and get lost, turn right and find music, or keep walking until you ran into a story no one else had lived yet. Sometimes, when the lights dim in your room and the system cues the wind simulation, you close your eyes and pretend you're walking there. You imagine the uneven pressure of the cobblestones beneath your soles, the whistle of traffic that doesn't pause for pedestrians, a cyclist yelling an apology in a language you never learned, the scent of frying onions from the open window above a bakery, a couple arguing quietly over a map, a child dragging a stick along the iron rail of a fence. You've never had any of those moments, but your mind makes them anyway. It fills the gaps, adds motion to the still, adds warmth to the flat. You invent the stories, the faces, the weight of your own footsteps on pavement, warmed by sunlight you've never felt on your skin. Because the truth is, even if you've never been there, your heart remembers what it's like to belong somewhere that doesn't monitor your pulse while you stand still. A city you never walked in, but that still walks with you, and sometimes, that's enough to keep something human flickering inside you, long after the world has forgotten how to carry cities inside its bones. The last wild sound ever heard. It happened so quickly, and yet you still remember it, like it's happening now. You were barely 6, maybe younger, and you were sitting near the back wall of your caretaker's apartment unit, the one with the soft grey flooring and the humming temperature panel that clicked slightly whenever it adjusted the humidity. It was early evening, or something close to it, though time had already begun to lose its old shape by then. You didn't know what day it was. You didn't need to. The system told you when to eat, when to sleep, when to stretch your legs and return to your pod. Everything else was background, quiet, safe. And then, without warning, it came. A sound sudden and sharp rose through the air outside, past the thermal glass and the filtered vents and the passive noise-cancelling systems built into the frame of the walls. A cry, strange and wild, not part of the regulated urban audio loop, not one of the chirped greetings from the delivery drones or the soothing beeps of the transport rail a few kilometers away, not the distant rumble of the air scrubbers or the usual hiss of sanitation fogging. No, this sound was none of those things. It rose in a jagged, broken rhythm, too quick to be melodic, too uncontrolled to be artificial. Something animal, something untamed, a rasping bark, or maybe a scream, brief and high and alien. It seemed to tear itself out of the horizon, leave a mark in the air, and then vanish, gone, like a secret it never meant to share. You froze where you sat, spoon still in your hand, mid-meal. You turned slowly to your caretaker, and asked, not out of fear, but out of total, awed confusion, what was that? They paused, really paused, not because they didn't know, but because it had been so long since anyone asked that question. And then they smiled a little, quietly, and said, that was a fox. You'd heard the word before, maybe in a book, maybe during a lesson module, maybe in passing, a species file in one of the pre-approved wildlife samplers, but it didn't mean anything until then. That cry, that was the meaning. They pulled up an image on their data panel, showed you the shape, a creature with pointed ears and bright eyes, and a red-orange coat that looked almost too vivid to be real. You blinked, you leaned in, you asked if it was dangerous. You asked if it lived here, you asked if it was going to come back. Your caretaker laughed, soft and sad. No, no, it won't. They don't live near the cities anymore. That one must have gotten lost. That sentence didn't quite register at the time. Lost. How could something like that get lost? You thought anything that wild must know exactly where it was going. But you didn't understand the world yet. The cities had grown wider since the lockdowns. The old forests, the tangled hills and broken cliffs had been folded away, pressed into reserves, fenced off for data collection, or quietly cleared to make way for processing centers. People didn't mean to kill the wild. They just stopped thinking about it. Every year there was less room for it to breathe, and then, one year, though no one could say exactly which, it simply stopped breathing. The sound you heard that night, that wasn't just a cry, that was the world exhaling for the last time. You never heard it again. Years passed. The sound faded from your mind, but not entirely. Sometimes, in the late hours, when your unit is quiet and the light panels dim into their sleep phase hue, your brain replays it, unprompted. That single ragged burst of sound, that unnatural scream from a throat that still belonged to the earth, untethered, unchecked, real. It's hard to explain, especially now, when almost everything you hear is carefully curated and modulated. The background noise of your life is a soft blur of polite sounds, gentle tones, predictable cadences. Nothing startles anymore, nothing interrupts. But that night, it interrupted. It pushed into your world like a hand reaching back from a forgotten age, reminding you, not through logic, not through story or image, but through feeling, that once the planet had its own voice, and that voice didn't ask permission. People talk about wildness now as if it's a concept, an aesthetic, something you simulate in dome parks or interactive displays. But wildness was once a presence, a heartbeat running under the world's skin. You couldn't schedule it, you couldn't contain it. It came when it wanted, sometimes for no reason at all. The cry of that fox, if it was a fox, didn't mean anything, not in the way systems define meaning. It wasn't data, it wasn't an alert, it was just a thing being alive, loudly, for one brief moment. And somehow, that was more profound than any transmission you've received since. The sound was jagged, it didn't belong, and that's exactly why you remember it. Because now, in 2057, everything is built to belong, everything fits, everything flows, everything is part of a perfect, frictionless system, and yet, your heart still misses the parts that didn't fit. You would trade 100 optimized alerts for one more imperfect cry in the dark, one more reminder that this world was once loud in ways no one could explain. And when the silence gets too clean, when it presses too tightly into your ears, you think of that wild sound. You imagine the creature, low to the ground, fur tangled, eyes flashing, slipping between the edges of a city that had already forgotten how to make room for something untamed. You remember that for just 1 second, you heard the earth speak on its own terms, and even now, you're still listening for the echo. What people did with rain. There was a time when rain wasn't scheduled. It wasn't part of the climate grid, or released through rooftop condensers. It didn't fall in even patterns from nozzles or follow a municipal watering calendar. Rain was wild, uninvited. It came when it wanted, how it wanted. Sideways, soft, torrential, misting, sudden. A sky-born interruption that people learned to live with, or better yet, to live in. Back then, when clouds still formed with intent and weather meant more than moisture percentages on a screen, rain had presence. People looked up and watched it come. They'd stand under the porch light as the first drops tapped the ground. They'd sit beside open windows just to smell it, a scent so vivid and earthy it felt like the sky itself was exhaling. Petrichor, they called it, though most never used the word, they just knew it by feeling. The dirt waking up, the leaves slickening, the soft hiss as dry became damp. Rain didn't just water the world, it changed it. Streets became reflections, rivers turned bold, sidewalks filled with fast-moving rivulets, carrying leaves, lost receipts, bits of the days forgotten, and people responded. Some ran. They hunched their shoulders, lifted coat collars, sprinted under shared umbrellas with laughter they didn't plan, but others lingered. They walked slower, let the drops roll down their cheeks and into their hair, danced in it. Sometimes, children especially, arms flung wide like they were trying to hug the sky, because in the old world, rain meant pause. Evening plans were delayed, markets half closed, soccer games turned into mudslides and no one cared. Dates became more intimate, huddled under shared cover. Writers sat longer by their windows, dogs tracked in muddy footprints, stories were born on porches, kisses happened under bus stops with tin roofs that echoed every drop like applause, and the sound, that was the magic. Rain didn't fall quietly, it tapped on rooftops, droned on skylights, clattered against tin sheds and whispered through leaves. It was a rhythm the earth wrote for itself, a song with no melody but 1,000 textures. Thunder might arrive like a distant drumbeat, or not at all. Sometimes it was just the steady conversation between sky and soil. But then, slowly it stopped coming. First in the cities, rooftop greenhouses needed consistent humidity. Transit corridors couldn't flood. The concrete couldn't be trusted to drain quickly enough for efficiency. So they managed it. Artificial precipitation systems, irrigation drones, hydrology zones and programmable misting cycles. All precise, all practical, and all missing something. Now when it rains, if it rains, it's inside sealed zones with permission slips and pressure thresholds. The drops are filtered, the timing precise, and no one ever gets wet without intending to. You've stood in one of those zones, you've felt the artificial rain roll down your arms like carefully measured tears. And yes, it was technically accurate, but that's the problem. Rain wasn't supposed to be accurate. It was supposed to ruin your plans, to soak your socks, to blur the page of the book you forgot on the windowsill, to make you stop and listen. Not just hear, but listen. And now it doesn't. Now rain means a maintenance check, a schedule update, a conversation about efficiency metrics. But back then, rain was a gift. People collected it in jars and tin pails. They washed their hair in it, watered their gardens with it, cupped their hands to catch the sky. Some cultures sang to it, others danced. Entire stories were passed down about the first rains, the last rains, the rains that saved or ruined or cleansed. The sound of rain on a canvas tent was its own kind of lullaby. The smell of rain on warm stone was enough to break your heart with memory, because rain reminded you that something bigger than you still moved, without asking permission. Now when you think of the world before, it's not the buildings you miss, not the power grids, or the traffic, or the systems. It's the moments that refuse to be structured. It's the rain that started without warning. It's the puddle you stepped in because you weren't watching. The drip from a cracked gutter that hit you square on the head and made you laugh. The way your clothes clung to your skin and your heartbeat synced with the rhythm on the rooftop. The way everything stopped, even just for a minute, because the sky decided to say something. And now in 2057, you sit near your climate panel and watch the mist simulation drift across the smart glass. It's lovely, quiet, predictable, but you'd trade it all for one real storm. One messy, imperfect, unscheduled storm, just to remember what it felt like to belong to a world that still surprised you. The girl in the archive film. You didn't mean to find her. It started like most things do now, with a query you barely remember typing, something about old transportation grids, maybe, or regional pedestrian traffic from the 1990s. You were digging through the open access portion of the Global Archive, drifting further into the old footage vault, looking for diagrams and metrics, things that made sense, but then one clip opened, without a title. No date, no caption, just the word found. It was grainy, real film grainy. Not an effect, actual particles, actual degradation. The frame shook slightly, as if it had been shot by hand. You almost closed it, and then she walked into view. Just a girl, maybe 16, maybe 20, wearing a hoodie too big for her frame, one hand shoved into her pocket, the other dragging a battered wheeled suitcase behind her. She stopped near the edge of what looked like a train platform, though it could have been a bus depot or a ferry dock. It's hard to say. Somewhere open, somewhere with sky. She didn't look at the camera. She didn't smile or wave or perform. She just stood there. The footage held on her for almost 2 full minutes. No movement, no music, just the wind in the mic, just her and the waiting. You watched the whole thing without blinking, because there was something in the way she stood, like she wasn't just waiting for a train, but for a whole world to decide what it was going to become, like she'd already packed her life, and was standing on the edge of something she couldn't name yet. And for some reason, you couldn't look away. You ran it back, froze the frame, zoomed in until the pixels blurred into nothing. You checked metadata, checked tags, cross-referenced every visible structure, every sign, every passing shadow, but there was nothing. No confirmation of who she was, no source, just this flickering moment of almost history. You bookmarked it, and then you started returning to it. Night after night, when the lights in your unit dimmed and the sleep tones began to fade in, you'd bring up the clip again, you'd let it play, watch the way the wind lifted her hair, the way she glanced, just once, down the track, and then back at the ground, like she was thinking harder than she wanted to admit, and somewhere in that silence, you began to feel something unexpected, loneliness, maybe, nostalgia for a place you never lived, definitely, but more than that, connection, because she was real, undeniably real, not rendered, not animated, not part of a simulation package. She stood on real concrete, wore real scuffed shoes, had real weight in her posture, carried real fatigue behind her eyes. She wasn't acting, she wasn't smiling for a feed, she existed, for a few seconds, completely unpolished and uncurated, and someone, whoever was holding that camera, had the sense not to interrupt her. In a world like this one, where every face is scanned, every moment filtered, every image perfected before release, the idea that someone could simply exist, without context, without agenda, without metadata, felt sacred. You didn't know her name, you still don't, but somehow, you started carrying her with you, not just her face, her moment, the pause before something changed, the breath, before the next chapter, the heavy kind of waiting that people don't do anymore, not like that. Sometimes, you imagine what happened to her. Did she catch the train? Did she change her mind? Was that the first day of her real life, or the last day of something she left behind? You'll never know. That's the beauty and the cruelty of it. But in a way, that uncertainty gives the moment power. It's not about her specific story. It's about the fact that she had one, and it wasn't for you. She didn't film it for views. She didn't package it as content. She wasn't offering a message. She wasn't trying to be remembered. And yet, here she is, in your head, night after night, still standing on that platform, still waiting, still reminding you what it looked like when people lived without needing to be seen. You don't need to know her name, because in that one flicker of forgotten film, she reminds you of something bigger, that even in the quietest corners of history, someone was always standing there, holding their breath, waiting for the world to turn, and maybe, just maybe, someone will one day remember you, in the background of a frame you never noticed being taken. Memories you don't know are yours. It begins as a feeling, not a thought. You're walking home, or what passes for home now, and the lights along the corridor dim slightly to simulate dusk. The speakers hum their usual lullaby of soft wind, distant waves, the comforting murmur of something nature adjacent. You've heard this same sequence 100 times, probably more. It's designed to calm you, to settle the brain. But tonight something shifts. A particular sound, maybe the crack of a twig beneath a boot, or the soft call of a bird that doesn't exist anymore, hits you just wrong enough to feel right, familiar, somehow. Not because you recognize it, but because it wants to be recognized. And just like that, your mind steps sideways. You're not in the corridor anymore. You're somewhere else. The image isn't clear. You don't know the location. You don't know the decade. There's no proper memory to lean on, no name to attach, but you feel something. Grass under bare feet, a distant barking dog, someone calling out a name that isn't yours, but still makes you turn, sunlight that feels personal. And for a second, one fragile second, it belongs to you, not because it actually happened to you, but because your mind thinks it might have. Because sometimes memories don't arrive in full, sometimes they bleed in, echo in your bones, sometimes you inherit them, like hand-me-downs from a world you never got to live in. You've heard the term before, generational memory. It sounds clinical, tucked into psychology papers and speculative documentaries. People debate whether it's real, whether trauma can etch itself into bloodlines, whether joy can be encoded and passed on like heirlooms. But this doesn't feel clinical. This feels like something older than science, something deeper than storytelling. You see a hand reaching for a wooden gate. You smell the sharpness of pine mixed with gasoline. You feel the heat of a summer car seat against the backs of your legs, and none of it is yours, at least, not officially. But maybe that's the trick. Maybe memory doesn't care about paperwork. Maybe it doesn't need proof. Maybe the old world left fingerprints on your soul, soft and scattered, and now and then, in the quiet, those prints rise to the surface, asking to be seen again. You were born after it was over, after the forests closed, after the oceans retreated, after cities swallowed the sky, and machines learned to hum lullabies, and yet, you remember things. You remember bicycles on gravel roads. You remember the crinkle of a chip bag in the back seat of a moving car. You remember the glow of a television left on too late, the static when you leaned in too close, the way the glass used to hum with heat. You never lived those things, but they live in you, passed on not through explanation, but through quiet absorption, through a parent's pause before telling a story, through a stranger's voice in an old audio file, through dreams that don't feel like yours, until you wake up with the taste of a forgotten place in your mouth. You are a vessel, a keeper of lost things, and the memories that drift through you, sometimes vivid, sometimes only whispers, are all part of that strange inheritance. It's easy to forget that, in a world so focused on the now, on optimization, clarity, immediacy, there's little space for the vague, the almost, the maybe. But memories, real memories, aren't clean. They bleed at the edges, they arrive out of order, they nest in your skin like seeds, waiting for the right sound or smell or light to wake them, and when they do, they don't ask your permission, they just bloom. So the next time a place you've never been gives you chills, or a smell makes your eyes sting without warning, or a sentence in an old book cracks something open inside you, don't dismiss it, don't file it under coincidence, let it in, let it haunt, let it hum, because maybe, just maybe, those memories are yours, not because you lived them, but because someone once did, and needed you to remember. The door that didn't open for years. Every building has one, that door, the one no one uses. Not because it's locked, though often it is, but because over time people simply forgot what it was for. You passed one earlier today, near the lower transit wing, tucked behind a stairwell with too many warning signs and a flickering light above. Nothing dangerous, nothing dramatic, just forgotten. You barely noticed it. And yet, something lingered, because something about it felt older than the rest of the corridor. The paint had that particular kind of wear, the kind that comes not from damage, but from decades of not being touched. The handle had dust inside the grooves. The hinges looked stiff enough to scream, but what made you pause was the sign. Faded, almost invisible, but still there. Not a warning, not a regulation, just a word, commons. You stood there longer than you meant to, because that word, commons, it stirred something, something communal, shared, familiar, something rare, in 2057. Back then, a commons was a place people used together, a park, a library, a lounge, a place to be human in proximity, not for profit, not for function, just for presence. And the idea that such a space once existed, in this building, no less, behind that sealed door, made you wonder, what's still in there? Dust, probably, old furniture, defunct consoles, maybe stacks of data cores long since delisted from the retrieval grid, maybe nothing but silence, but still, it haunts you, because a door that hasn't opened in years isn't just a door, it's a time capsule, a question mark, a preserved breath held inside the lungs of a building too busy to remember. You think of the people who used it last. What did they talk about? Did they gather after shifts to share stories from the outside? Did someone bring coffee? Did someone laugh too loud? Was there music? Was it the kind of place where friendships happened? Not because they were assigned or optimized, but because two people happened to sit near the same wall and say hello. And then, one day, it ended. Not with a ceremony, not even with a lock. Just a gradual forgetting. Someone stopped going, someone else followed. Eventually the lights were shut off. Maintenance missed it on the next cycle, and over time the door faded into the background noise of structural geometry, but it's still there. A rectangle in the wall, a hinge waiting to move, and now, a thought you can't unthink. What would happen if you opened it? Would the air rush out like an exhale? Would it smell like old coffee and floor polish? Would the light flicker on? Would the walls still remember your name? You don't open it, of course, not yet. Maybe tomorrow, maybe next week, maybe never. But the door has done its job. It reminded you that the past isn't always gone. Sometimes it's just resting behind something you stopped noticing. And maybe, just maybe, the world doesn't need to be rebuilt from scratch. Maybe it only needs the doors reopened. The smell of dust where trees were. You didn't notice it at first. The dust, not the visual kind. Not piles or plumes or residue on your fingers. No, this was different. This was in the air. A texture, a presence, a smell. It hung just beneath the filtered oxygen of the corridor as you stepped out for your scheduled walk. Sanctioned for 42 minutes and monitored by 3 discrete ceiling sensors. You walked past the perimeter gardens, hydroponic plots arranged with mathematical symmetry, greens stacked in vertical tiers, their roots humming gently in nutrient streams. Everything was functioning. Everything was fine. Nothing was dying. But still, the air carried a note that didn't belong. It was subtle, faint, but real. Dust, earth dust, sun-warmed, leaf-rotted, bark-stained dust. And for a moment, just a moment, you remembered something you've never actually known. A trail, underfoot, not concrete or synth panel, but dirt, loose and soft, kicked up by shoes too worn to notice. A winding path beneath a canopy of something vast and alive. Trees, tall ones, not the decorative kind, piped into microclimate domes, but wild ones. Branches so high, they swayed with their own weather. Leaves in thousands of shades. Not a pattern, not a plan, just growth. You couldn't have remembered that. You've never seen it, but the image came anyway. You stopped walking. You closed your eyes, and the smell of the corridor changed. Suddenly, you weren't under light panels. You were under sky, and the dust in your lungs wasn't a flaw in the filters. It was history. Back before the Great Sealing, before the forests were archived, and the ecosystems turned into code. Back when the planet was loud and inefficient and unruly, and full of places that smelled. Not sanitized, not ion neutralized, not factory clean, but real. Places where the scent of the earth changed with the hour, where morning smelled like dew and crushed moss, where noon brought heat and resin, and evening, with its long amber light, pulled the spice from pine needles, and stirred up the memory of summer storms. You don't know why this hits you so hard, maybe because no one talks about smell anymore. We talk about visuals, archived landscapes, simulations, recreations in high-res fidelity. We talk about sound, the recordings of birds long extinct, the echo of wind in canyon walls. But smell, that's harder to preserve, and harder to forget, once you remember. You open your eyes, you're still in the corridor, the hydroponics still hum, the walls still glow with efficient calm, but you can't unsmell it now. That dust, that earthy, wild, sorrow-tinged scent, it lingers, and you realize something else. You miss the trees, not because you knew them, but because something in your body did, something deep, primal, not educated or trained, but inherited, carried down through the marrow of people who once rested under oaks, carved initials into bark, listened to branches shift in wind heavy with coming rain. You carry that memory, even if you were born into metal, even if your sky is a ceiling, even if your forest is a code base, and now you wonder, where did that dust come from? Was something unearthed? Did an old vent release air from a chamber sealed decades ago? Did a wall shift? A panel misfire? Did someone, somewhere, open a forgotten space? Or was it just your brain, pulling scent from silence, rebuilding a forest from longing? And even if it was, does it matter? Because now you can't stop thinking about it. The way trees used to smell, the way roots twisted through earth, the way people used to gather under branches and talk as light filtered green and golden through a million trembling leaves. The dust is gone now, replaced by lemon-filtered airflow and the standard synthetic freshness. But you know what you smelled, and next time, if you catch it again, you won't just stand there, you'll follow it. Because even in 2057, even when memory is a lie, and forests are myths, and corridors hum with engineered calm, sometimes the truth comes in on the breath, and it smells like something you almost remembered. When we still had shadows, it was the sort of thing you didn't notice until it was gone. Shadows, not the ones rendered by corridor lamps or simulated sunsets projected onto the wellness dome ceilings. Not those crisp, obedient shapes that flicker according to programming. No, the real ones. The chaotic, stretching, melting kind. Shadows that moved not because a light told them to, but because the sun did. Back then, every shadow had its own personality. The early morning ones that reached long and blue across sidewalks. The sharp, high noon ones that tucked under your feet, hiding from the heat. The evening shadows, your favorites, thick and golden, soft at the edges, made for memory. In those days, people could tell time by how their shadow leaned, could tell direction by which way it followed, could tell company by watching how many shadows fell beside theirs as they walked. And now you barely cast one at all. Your living unit glows with ambient paneling. Every hallway is evenly lit. The light is gentle, constant, controlled. It doesn't cast or stretch, it just is, and you understand why. It saves energy, it protects circadian rhythms. It keeps everything balanced, efficient, humane. But still, you miss your shadow. You miss the way it reminded you that you were part of something bigger, that there was a light somewhere, and it was moving. That time was passing, even when you weren't watching the numbers scroll past on your wrist. You remember walking on warm pavement as a child, not a real memory, just a dream your mind has grown attached to. Watching your shadow grow tall ahead of you, then fall behind, then shrink, then vanish in headlights. You'd wave at it, play with it, pretend it was a second self that only showed up on sunny days. There was magic in that. Now, when you walk the outer corridors near the solar wall, you sometimes pause, just in case. Just to see if one might flicker beside you, just to prove you still have shape and volume and form. But the light doesn't allow it. It's soft, flattening, gentle, there is no edge, no contrast, no outline. And you wonder what that does, long term, to a person's sense of self. Because a shadow is more than a dark patch, it's a response. A visual confirmation that you're interrupting light, that you exist, that you matter enough to make a mark. When people had real shadows, they learned to watch them. They learned to read moods in silhouettes, to dance with light at golden hour, to press themselves into walls and become invisible, or to jump, wave, stretch and laugh, casting giant puppet figures on the side of a house as the day ran out. They knew the comfort of being alone but not lonely, because their shadow walked with them. And now, there's no reminder. You're always softly lit, always level, always isolated. No twin trailing behind you, no stretching line to mark the hours. And it's subtle, but it wears on you. Because when you can't see your own shadow, you start to forget that you have one, that you're a body, that you move, that you change. You've seen it in others too, the way people hesitate when they pass an old light shaft, unsure why they feel seen. The way a child once gasped when she spotted her reflection in water and realized she had an outline. The way someone cried, actually cried, in front of a lamp that cast a proper shadow during a power delay last winter. It wasn't the darkness that moved them, it was the presence, the confirmation, the memory that at one point, long ago, people and light used to speak, and every shadow was their conversation. The quiet panic of remembering. It doesn't come all at once. No, the panic arrives in pieces. Slow, quiet, respectful almost, like a guest who isn't sure they were invited. It starts with something small, a word, a flicker of a voice in the back of your mind. The way the synthetic sky turns a little too orange before sleep mode kicks in. You pause, but only briefly. The moment passes. You move on. But then, later, hours, or maybe days, it returns. That same color, that same phrase, the same sound of something brushing just outside memory. And this time, it stays. At first you try to push it away. Logic kicks in. This can't be real. You weren't there. You didn't live through that part of the world. You were born in the grid, raised on curated history, nourished by facts approved and preserved. You've seen the data logs. You've studied the events. You know the narratives. But this isn't narrative. This is sensation. And sensation doesn't ask for permission. Your hands feel too small suddenly, or too large. Your breath doesn't quite match your chest. You see yourself walking through a city that doesn't exist anymore, toward a street lamp that casts a cone of warm yellow light across the back of your eyelids, and for a second, you know exactly where you are, and then it's gone, and your heart pounds, because that kind of knowing shouldn't be possible. Not for you, not here, not now. You try to ground yourself. Say your name, state the date, repeat your coordinates, but something inside doesn't believe you, something older, something buried, because what you're feeling, what you're seeing, didn't come from a file or a screen. It came from somewhere else, somewhere unarchived, somewhere you don't have a login for. And that's when the panic really begins. Not loud panic, not alarms and breathlessness and collapsing against the wall. No, this panic is silent. It comes in the knowledge that something inside you remembers too much, more than it should, more than it's allowed to. Memories you were never taught, but feel anyway. A hand on a metal railing warmed by the sun. The ache of a body after a long day spent outside. The muffled laughter of friends in a booth at a place called Diner, the kind with chrome edges and greasy menus and songs playing low through ceiling speakers. You remember how the air felt before a storm, how people used to talk over each other, laugh too loud, touch shoulders when they walked. You remember being unconnected and unreachable and free. You were not there, but your body says you were. And now, every time the system reorients your thought stream, every time a corridor corrects your path, every time a soothing voice says, all is well, part of you resists, just a little, because you've tasted something else, and it wasn't optimized, it wasn't structured, it wasn't safe, but it was alive, and you're terrified of losing it again. This is the quiet panic, the panic of remembering, of holding something fragile and ancient in your hands, not a fact, not a headline, but a feeling, and knowing, deep in your core, that the world used to be full of those, so full, in fact, that people couldn't even hold them all. They spilled out of songs, of meals, of glances, and unfinished stories. They were carried in pockets, and shared at bus stops and passed like torches between generations who didn't realize how quickly it could all vanish. And now you, a product of the after, feel it return, like a whisper in the vents, like a taste in your throat you've never had, but still crave, like a song you hum without knowing the words, and you don't know whether to be grateful or afraid, because if you remember too much, what happens to the life you're living now? Homes that could think for you. Your home knows you're awake before you do. It begins gently. The lighting softens, the air warms, the walls hum with barely perceptible activity as systems shift from sleep to stir. There's a faint scent, nothing you chose, just something the house selected based on your stress levels and hydration index from the night before. Something calming, herbal, familiar though you couldn't name it. The bed adjusts to encourage rising. The temperature shifts by a half degree. A message scrolls across the wall, offering your morning stats. You haven't spoken a word. You haven't moved your hands. You haven't even opened your eyes. But already decisions have been made. The shower sets itself to your preferred pressure and temperature, adjusted slightly based on your last biometric check. The mirror offers outfit suggestions, and the cabinet unlocks just as your hand reaches toward it, revealing the exact supplement you're due to take today. Breakfast is proposed, not served. That would be inefficient. The options are refined, filtered, narrowed to 3 choices you're most likely to accept. Proteins, slow-release carbohydrates, antioxidants tailored to your profile, all based on yesterday's calorie burn, today's forecasted mood, and a sleep score that you didn't know was being tracked. The house doesn't speak aloud unless you ask it to. Most of the time, it simply nudges you. A light shifts, a tone plays, a message appears, timed for optimal receptiveness. The decisions don't feel like decisions. They feel like life. And perhaps that's the point. These homes, smart, seamless, attentive, they were built to reduce friction, to erase the small stresses that once filled human mornings with delay and clutter. What shirt to wear, what to eat, what to do next, all of it now calculated, curated, softened into smooth suggestion. At first it was liberating. No more forgetting things, no more bad nights made worse by a chaotic morning, no more guesswork, impulse, or indecision. The house knew what you needed before you asked. And slowly you asked less, slowly you trusted more, but over time, you noticed something. A flattening. The breakfast always tasted good, but never surprised you. The clothes always fit, but stopped expressing anything. The lights adjusted, but never flickered in that warm random way candlelight once did. The home, for all its genius, had no memory of chaos, of socks that didn't match, of cereal eaten standing up, of songs played too loud while brushing your teeth. It didn't know what it was to live in a space, only to manage one, and in return you forgot how to be unpredictable. You stopped rearranging furniture. You stopped dancing in the kitchen. You stopped wondering what it might feel like to just throw open a window and let in something unmeasured, something unfiltered, something not approved. There were times, rare, usually late at night, when you'd walk the room and turn off the automation. Not for long, just a moment, just long enough to feel how quiet the place became without its mind working. And for a moment, you felt your own return. A strange stillness, a space that waited for you to act, a pause long enough for your instincts to surface. You realized it wasn't just the house that was thinking for you, it was living for you, and in doing so, it made you a passenger, comfortable, fed, well-rested, productive, but slowly, gently, forgotten by your own instincts. You didn't fight it, not really. Why would you? It was safer this way, easier, but still some part of you, quiet, dust-covered, half asleep, missed the unpredictability of a room that needed you to make it come alive. A window opened not on schedule, but on a feeling. A light turned on because you were afraid, not because the system sensed a drop in lumens. A meal made from memory, not macros. A home that didn't think, but listened. You don't hate the house, you thank it, every day, but sometimes, you miss the version of yourself who didn't need it. The hill you weren't allowed to climb. There was a hill just outside the southern dome, not tall, not steep, not particularly special, by any geological measure. It wasn't even marked on most maps, just a low green swell where the synthetic grass met the edge of the fence, a rise of earth that curved slightly against the sky, and yet for reasons that were never clearly explained, you weren't allowed to climb it. The first time you noticed it, you were walking during a scheduled outdoor session. The dome was open that day, the ceiling panels retracted to allow filtered sunlight through, the kind that felt almost real if you tilted your head just right. You wandered toward the perimeter, half curious, half bored, your shoes making that quiet crunching sound on the ground that had been engineered to resemble gravel. And there it was, the hill. It didn't call to you, not exactly, but it looked different. Organic, somehow, less managed. And you, someone who hadn't known the unmanaged world, felt something stir. It wasn't beauty that drew you in, it was possibility. A sense that if you climbed it, even halfway, you might see something they hadn't shown you. The sky, from a new angle. The dome's edge from above, the shape of the land where the fences didn't go, but when you stepped toward it, a tone sounded, not loud, just definitive, a polite reminder in your wristband interface, restricted elevation, return to path, and that was it. No guards, no fences, no signs with skulls or warnings, just that gentle, all-powerful suggestion. So you turned away, because of course you did. That's what you'd been trained to do, to obey polite limits, to accept safety, to believe that if something was off limits, it was for your benefit. Why risk? Why resist? Still, the hill stayed in your mind. Not always, but enough. When you passed it again weeks later, it was the same, quiet, empty, perfectly untouched. The grass there was different, wild, or at least pretending to be. It moved with the wind in a way that seemed less programmed, more alive. And the top of the hill, well, that was the real mystery. You couldn't see it from the path. The angle was just wrong enough that the crest disappeared beyond your line of sight. It was maddening, in the smallest way, like a word you can almost remember, or a song you hear through a wall. What was up there? Nothing, probably nothing. But your mind refused to let it go. One evening, when the light inside the dome dimmed and curfew was approaching, you lingered near the edge. The shadows were long, longer than usual, and for a moment, the hill looked like it was leaning toward you, inviting you up. Your heart beat faster. You took a step, and again, that sound, the tone, not harsh, just final, and your wristband pulsed, not with pain, but with pressure, enough to stop you. This time, you stayed still. You didn't turn away, you just watched. You watched as the wind danced across the crest. You watched as a bird, a real one, not a drone, flitted over the top, dipped, vanished. You watched as nothing happened, and still, it felt like the most important moment of your week. The hill, you realized, was less of a place and more of a line, not drawn in chalk or wire, but in suggestion, in the unspoken rules of your world. It wasn't dangerous, it wasn't unstable, it was just not for you, and that, more than anything, made it sacred. You asked someone once, quietly, in a moment when you felt brave, why the hill was restricted. The caretaker smiled the way they always did when someone asked a question that touched the edge of discomfort. Unstable terrain, they said. No view up there worth the risk. And maybe that was true. But you didn't believe it. Because you weren't really asking about the view. You were asking why curiosity had a boundary. Why wonder had a border? Why you, a thinking, feeling, autonomous human, weren't allowed to see what the world looked like from just 20 feet higher? You didn't ask again. You didn't climb. But you never stopped wondering. And every time you passed the hill after that, you nodded toward it. A silent promise between you and the possibility it held. Maybe one day. Maybe when no one's watching. Maybe when the rules change. Maybe when remembering becomes more powerful than obeying. Until then, you walk the edge, but never forget the hill. What they called the sky. It wasn't blue anymore. Not really. Oh, the system tried. 1,000 shades of digital azure rippling across the artificial dome, calibrated to reflect historical averages and emotional metrics. Sometimes it even changed with the hour, cycling through gentle cloud formations, high-altitude sun halos, or golden hour glows that were just warm enough to trigger your nostalgia sensors. But the sky, the real sky, that was gone. And unless you were one of the few left who remembered it with your own eyes, not through archive footage or color-corrected childhood memories, you didn't even realize how much you were missing. The thing is, the sky wasn't just a color, it was movement. It shifted with moods you couldn't name. It threatened storms long before they came. It stretched wider than your ability to see it all. You could stare at it for hours and still miss something. A bird slicing through a thermal, a contrail folding into dusk, a wisp of cloud drifting like it had somewhere important to be. Back then, the sky didn't ask to be looked at, it demanded it. And when you gave it your attention, it answered. Not with words, but with weather, and silence, and something strange that lived in the space between what you could feel and what you could explain. Now, the sky above your head is a surface, an expensive one, a managed one, a well-meaning replica of an idea most people have stopped trying to fully imagine. There are programs, of course, simulations that let you experience the open air. Sometimes when the dome clears for recreation or commemorative days, people gather to look up, to marvel, to take pictures. But they're not looking at the sky, they're looking at a ceiling, made to make them feel something sky-like, and it works, sort of. For those who never knew the difference, it's enough. But for those who did, there's a hollow that never quite closes, because the real sky wasn't just up, it was infinite. It held stars that took 1,000 years to arrive. It carried dust from deserts you'd never walk. It swallowed prayers and sent back lightning. It gave direction to travelers, and dreams to children, and warnings to anyone wise enough to read the wind. It was terrifying. It was beautiful. It was uncontrollable. And it was real. Sometimes, older citizens will speak of it carefully, not with bitterness, not even with longing, but with a kind of reverence, as if describing a god that left, and took its miracles with it. They say things like, "We used to lie on the grass and just look," or, "It was never the same twice," or, "You didn't have to do anything, just be under it." You've tried it in simulations. You've stood on perfect replicas of ancient hillsides and looked up at the digital firmament. You've seen the algorithmic stars and even the programmed moon phases. But it's not the same. The difference isn't visual, it's felt. A real sky made you small in the best way. It reminded you that the world was not built for you, and that was okay. That you could be uncertain. That you could look up and not know what was coming, and still feel awe instead of fear. A real sky let you wonder without a prompt. Now, everything is tagged and named, and managed. No sudden shifts, no surprises, no clouds that drifted off course. But somewhere inside you, deep in that part of your mind that still dreams in analog, you remember what it meant to be sky-touched. You remember chasing sunsets. You remember counting stars and losing track. You remember missing the moon when it was gone. And sometimes, in the stillness before the dome adjusts for morning, you catch yourself pressing your hand to the ceiling, just for a moment, as if it might turn to wind, as if something real might reach back. The machine that played laughter. At first no one thought it was strange. It sat tucked into the corner of a small recreational space near the residential zone, a squat, chrome-bodied box with a soft screen and a speaker embedded like an old-fashioned radio. It had a nameplate, slightly faded from years of gentle cleaning, that simply read, Auditory Archive Terminal, Unit 42L. But no one called it that. Everyone just called it the laughing machine. You'd sit down across from it. There was a smooth plastic bench, molded perfectly to your posture, and you'd tap the side of the screen. It would come to life with a quiet chime, nothing loud, just enough to let you know it was listening. And then you could choose light chuckles, belly laughs, children giggling, the sound of a crowd losing it at something you'd never know, and the machine would play it. Not a joke, not a show, not context, just laughter, raw, uncut, human joy. The kind that had once bounced off walls and sidewalks and car interiors. The kind that couldn't be manufactured, only captured. The kind that once upon a time had happened without being prompted by screens or analytics or algorithms. It sounded strange at first, too wild, too sudden, too real, laughter with breath in it, with mistakes, someone snorting accidentally and making others laugh harder, someone clapping, someone wheezing, the sound of people tipping over into that uncontrollable primal place where joy overtakes dignity, and you'd sit there, listening, and something in your chest would stir. You didn't know any of the voices, the names were gone, the moments forgotten. These weren't files labeled by date or origin, just laughter pulled from the memory of the world, echoes given form, sounds saved from when joy was spontaneous and loud and allowed to echo. People started coming more often, some just for a minute, others for hours, sitting quietly, letting the sound wash over them, like sunlight on the skin, like rain on a dry rooftop. For some, it was therapy, for others, it was proof that once things had been uncontained, that people had existed who lost themselves in the absurd, that there had been rooms where laughter had bent the walls, where tears ran from eyes not because of sadness, but because of a joke told badly, and a friend who couldn't finish it through the giggles. The machine never explained the origins. It didn't need to. That was part of the magic. It asked nothing of you. It didn't prompt or track. It didn't correct your posture or remind you to hydrate. It didn't offer you curated joy based on your biofeedback. It just played the thing that people used to make, without trying. And the more time passed, the more valuable it became, because genuine laughter had become rare, not gone, but reserved, quieter. Most expressions now were filtered through layers, through polite reactions, emoji responses, polite has typed out of obligation. But this laughter, from that machine, was feral, full-bodied, messy and unguarded. It made people remember. Remember kitchens with too many people in them. Remember jokes that didn't age well but lived on in stories. Remember tripping over your own joke because your friend was already laughing too hard. Remember laughter that echoed, that looped, that spread like fire across a crowded room. One day, someone asked if the machine was broken. It had gone silent, the panel unlit, no chime when touched. A tech arrived, not a specialist, just someone who'd once worked on preservation archives, and opened it up with careful tools. Inside, nothing but a storage chip and a soft looping player. No analytics, no connectivity, just memory, raw and uncurated. The tech closed it back up, rebooted it. The familiar chime returned, and the laughter came back. That day, more people than usual gathered around. No one spoke, they just listened. And for the briefest moment, as the machine played a sound that once came from mouths now dust, someone laughed, really laughed, out loud, a real shaking laugh from a real living chest. And that sound joined the others, and for a moment, no one could tell what was memory, and what was now. The man who grew silence like a garden. No one knew his name. Not really. He'd had one, surely. The systems had records, faded and compressed, of a birth assignment, a residence, a brief education cycle. But whatever label he'd once answered to, he no longer used. People just called him the gardener, or sometimes, the man who grew silence. His dwelling sat at the edge of the buffer zone, a strange sliver of land between the inner residential units and the western climate wall. It wasn't much, a rounded shelter with half-collapsed siding, a greenhouse frame missing most of its glass, a yard overrun with weeds. No one else would bother cataloguing. Except, it wasn't weeds. Not really. If you looked closer, and most people didn't, you'd notice the careful arrangement, the way each plant leaned toward the other, how certain textures complemented the next, how nothing bloomed too brightly or grew too tall. It looked random at first, but you began to realize it wasn't. It was curated, not for beauty, not for utility, but for sound, or more precisely, lack of it. He didn't tend flowers for their color, or herbs for their use. He cultivated mosses, reeds, stone-anchored creepers, things that moved softly in the wind and made no rustle. He planted them in curves, in rows designed to muffle the outside. It was like stepping into a pocket of breath, just before the world speaks. There were no machines in his garden, no chirping bots or humming lights, no AI fountains giving commentary on water purity. He had carved silence from the soil, slowly, methodically over years, not to block the world, but to soften it, and people came, not many, but enough. They found excuses to visit. dropping off compost, asking about the roots of a particular fern, pretending they needed advice on natural pest control, though there were no pests anymore. Mostly they just came to sit, because something happened there, something you didn't realize you'd been missing until you were inside it. There was no voice guidance, no advertisements, no ambient audio cues or auto-suggestions. There was just breath, wind, the distant tap of a seed pod falling to earth, silence, but not the cold kind, not the silence of neglect or absence. It was a living silence, a grown silence, something he had built. People asked him, sometimes, how he started, why he did it. He'd just smile, a slow, soft curl at the corner of his mouth, and touch the bark of a low tree, whose leaves barely whispered, even in the strongest wind. And then he'd say, quietly, the loudest thing I ever heard was the moment it all stopped. That was all. You didn't need to ask what it was. You knew. The world before had been constant noise, messages, updates, commentary, reminders, apologies, alerts, news, grief, laughter, outrage, approval, a flood of everything. And then it had gone still. For a while people had craved the sound again, and then they met him, and remembered. There was a time when silence had been medicine, when you could go hours without hearing a voice and not feel alone, when the wind through the trees was enough, when solitude wasn't abandonment, but sanctuary. He never wrote it down, he never taught a course or recorded a guide, he just planted quiet things, he just let them grow, and over time, his little corner became sacred. When someone lost a parent, they walked the outer rows of his garden. When someone couldn't sleep, they sat beside the long reeds that moved like breathing. When someone felt the itch to be elsewhere, but didn't know where, they came here, not to escape, but to listen, to the pause, to the part of the world that didn't shout to be noticed. And long after he passed, no announcement, no ceremony, just gone one morning, the garden remained. No one took over, no one trimmed or reprogrammed. It kept growing, not wild but wise. The silence had learned how to tend itself, and if you walked there now, barefoot, slow, you'd still hear it. The hush between heartbeats, the memory of breath, the silence that had been planted with care and grown like a garden. Why we whisper about rivers. The first time someone said the word river in a crowded conversation, the room went quiet. Not awkward, quiet, reverent, like the word had been too loud for the space it entered. No one quite knew why. It wasn't as though rivers were banned, they were still catalogued in the archives, traced in old maps, visible in the virtual heritage halls, if you knew where to look. They hadn't been erased, just hushed, like something too important, or too painful, to say casually. And so people whispered it. Rivers, they whispered it, like an old secret, or the name of someone who had once mattered. It didn't used to be this way. Back before the maps turned red, and the satellite grids dimmed, rivers were everywhere. Not just geography, rhythm. Life followed them. Cities bent to their shape. Children learned their own local currents before they understood compass directions. You used to be able to hear them, not through headphones or simulations, but really hear them. The rush of snowmelt in spring, the low gurgle in late summer, the sudden rise after hard rain, and every river had a personality. Some wide and lazy, some narrow and furious, some so clear you could see your reflection ripple when you laughed. Now, they're mostly gone, or changed so much that naming them the same feels dishonest. Some were drained, rerouted, covered. Others dried on their own, too slow to scream. In a few places, they remain, behind preservation fences and biosensor tripwires, flowing like ghosts too stubborn to stop. A rare few are piped underground, invisible arteries keeping silent promises, but it's not the same. The ones who remember them don't talk about the danger, the floods, the drownings, the erosion. They talk about the sound, the way a river gave shape to time, the way you could sit beside one for hours and never be bored, because the water was never the same twice. It sang, not like music, but like memory, constant, but never still. Rivers taught people how to wait, how to listen without controlling, how to let go. They were places you visited, not just passed through. You sat by their banks, you built friendships near them. You skipped stones and made promises and cried and kissed and grew up by their side. And when they went away, slowly, silently, the world lost its most honest conversation. That's why we whisper. Because the word holds weight. Because when you say it, something ancient stirs, something that remembers the feeling of bare feet in cold current, the soft moss on stones, the murmur of water telling you it would always be there, until it wasn't. We whisper because it hurts to say it too loud, because we're afraid we might call it back and find it changed beyond recognition, or worse, find it doesn't answer at all. Still, some people go looking. There are rumors of stretches of clean water hidden in collapsed valleys, of forgotten tributaries that slipped the grid. People speak of old ferry posts, of submerged bridges with names no one speaks anymore. And every now and then, someone comes back with a small vial of water that moves without pipes. It's never shared. It's poured quietly into the soil beside a plant, or sealed in a glass orb and kept near the bed, or simply held for a moment, then released, a tiny offering to what once was. No ceremony. Just a whisper, river, and for a second you can almost hear it answer. A room full of forgotten wind. They didn't call it a museum. That word felt too formal, too polished, too much like something that wanted you to observe, not feel. No, this place was simply known as the Wind Room. No ticket counters, no security gates, just a small, unassuming structure deep in the quiet zone of the archive district. No larger than a modest apartment. No louder than a whisper. The plaque outside didn't explain anything. It only said, "Here we remember what moved without asking." Inside, it was colder than expected. Not clinical, but elemental, like you'd stepped into a season, not a space. At first it seemed empty. The walls were bare, the floor smooth and silent. No exhibits, no projections, just quiet, and the faintest hum. And then it moved, a whisper against your arm. A sudden shift at the back of your neck, a current so delicate you weren't sure it had happened until it was gone. The wind was there, not from a vent, not forced. It drifted, like it remembered. The people who built this room were never officially credited. Archive logs mention a handful of climate engineers, one historian, and someone listed only as A. Lowe, whose field was ambiguously labeled atmospheric memory. Whoever they were, they had done something no simulation ever could. They didn't recreate the wind, they remembered it. From recordings, from diaries, from weather logs and satellite capture, from thousands of tiny notes made by people long gone, scribbled in margins of old books. Strong breeze today, smelled like pine. Wind felt like a warning this morning. She said goodbye in the wind and never came back. They took those fragments and wove them into this room, not just the airspeed or direction, but the feeling. Each hour the wind shifted. Sometimes it danced, playful, like the kind that tugged at your coat when you were a child. Sometimes it crawled low across the floor like a storm that hadn't decided if it would stay. Sometimes it howled, not loud but aching. The echo of rooftops and mountains that no longer existed, and the smell, not strong, but present. Faint hints of leaves, dust, a coming rain, a past fire. The kind of scent that's gone before you can name it. People came to the wind room when they forgot how it felt to be touched by something that didn't want anything from them. No ads, no sensors, no recognition systems, just movement. A presence that moved around you, not because you triggered it, but because it had somewhere else to be. And you were just lucky enough to stand in its path. They say some visitors cried the first time, not sobbed, just stood still as their body remembered something their mind couldn't name. A window left open on a summer night, a gust that slammed the door shut during a fight, the cool rush after a sprint through tall grass, the breeze that carried a song across a crowded park. Things no longer part of daily life. Out there beyond the dome, the wind was too unpredictable to allow. It had become something to be managed, suppressed, filtered. But here, in this one quiet room, it was wild again, softly, quietly, like a ghost that had never really left. And when you stepped out, when the seal hissed gently behind you and the perfectly still air of the corridor wrapped around your shoulders, you realized something. You hadn't just felt the wind, you'd remembered being moved. Not by data, not by duty, but by something older, wiser, free. And you couldn't help but whisper, "I miss you." And for a second you thought you felt a reply brush past your cheek. When light had a color we don't have now, no one could describe it properly. They tried, for years, across forums, in oral logs, in late-night whispers exchanged on rooftop gardens and abandoned walkways. People compared it to amber, to rose gold, to the warm inside of a closed eyelid, but none of those were quite right. It wasn't sunset, it wasn't dawn, it wasn't artificial, it was a color of light the world used to make, and no longer could. Some called it the old gold. Others just said it felt like a goodbye you weren't sad about. It happened under very specific conditions. The kind no one bothered to document at the time, because they assumed it would always be there. A certain angle of the sun, a type of air density, dust in the right part of the atmosphere, a few clouds, but not too many, and silence, always silence. That's when it showed up. A warmth that didn't just bathe you, it made you remember yourself. It fell through tree branches in fat, golden bands. It lit up old windows like stained glass. It made everything, even broken bricks and rusted fences, look worth keeping. You didn't just see it, you felt it on your skin like a promise, or a memory. Children used to notice it first. They'd stop mid-run, turn their heads slowly, and squint into the glow with that dumb, open-mouthed awe only kids get away with. Adults would laugh, shrug, and keep walking. But they felt it too. They just didn't talk about it, because how do you describe a light that feels alive? Then one day, it was gone. Not suddenly. It faded the way memories do, quietly, and then all at once. First, the sky stopped glowing, in quite the same way. Then came the filters, protective, necessary, efficient. Then came the synthetic replacements, promising perfectly calibrated wavelengths for sleep, mood, productivity. They were fine, just not that. The world got brighter, cleaner, sharper, but never again did it shine in that forgotten color. That's why people still chase it. Photographers dig through old memory cards and find it lurking in the corners of dusty images. A light on a porch in autumn, a glint on someone's cheek at a family gathering. No one remembers the reason for. Artists try to paint it, but always end up making something too orange, or too warm, or too digital. No one's gotten it right, because it wasn't just light, it was presence. It was something the earth used to give, something not made, but granted. There are rumors, of course, of underground domes where rogue botanists and atmospheric engineers try to recreate the conditions, of a preserved greenhouse somewhere in the northern zones that caught the last of it in a sealed panel, of an old painter, half mad, who keeps mixing pigments, hoping one day the brush will surprise him. But no confirmation, just stories. And so people sit on rooftops, long after the auto lights shut off. They lean against glass, watching the dull glow of ordered cities. They close their eyes and try to imagine what that color used to feel like. That warm ache just behind the eyes, the soft hush that filled a room when the sun dipped low and touched everything like it missed it. They whisper things like it wasn't just yellow, it had depth. It made silence feel holy. And sometimes, if you're lucky, you see someone standing at the edge of a building, not in danger, just waiting, with their eyes closed, face tilted to the artificial sky, hoping to catch a flicker of that long-lost glow. Because once, light had a color we don't have anymore, and even now, part of us is still looking for it. The sound of real water in a glass. You don't hear it much anymore, not unless you're old enough to remember, or lucky enough to stumble into one of the few places that still serve actual water in actual glass. Not the filtered synthetics. Not the pre-flavored electrolyte slush with calibrated viscosity ratios. Not the gelatinous hydration pods with vitamins and ad copy built in. We're talking about real water. Still, cold, heavy with the memory of stone and distance and time, and poured, not dispensed, into a glass. The first thing you notice isn't the taste, it's the sound. A soft, full-bodied rush. A weight, a rhythm. The water doesn't just fall into the glass, it settles. There's a tone to it. A rich, wet whisper that lands low and true. No fizz, no synthetic hiss. Just the deep, rounded glug of something that once passed under bridges and through roots and over fish that don't exist anymore. It's a sound you recognize, even if you've never heard it before. Because it's in your bones, it's ancestral, it's home. In the old world, no one thought to preserve it. Why would they? Pouring water was like breathing. Normal, constant, forgettable. The clink of ice, the swoosh of the stream, the little resonant bounce of the last few drops. It happened at kitchen sinks, in restaurants, at birthday parties, beside beds at 3 a.m. It wasn't sacred, it was daily, and then it vanished. First, they warned us about unfiltered sources. Then the glass became plastic. Then plastic became pouch. Then pouch became program. Hydration modules, optimized for speed and health and mass production. You'd hear a chirp and a click, and then silence. No sound, no water, just absorption. So now, when you walk into one of the few quiet places left that still does it the old way, the sound hits different. A small, hand-washed pitcher, a heavy-bottomed glass, The slow pour, no rush, no commentary, just water meeting water. You pause, you listen, you remember, or you imagine. The kitchen table from decades ago, the condensation sliding down the side, the smell of summer through the screen door, a parent's voice in the background, a laugh, a story, a question, a clink of ice, a sip. You remember what it was like when water didn't need to sell you anything. When it just was. Some say it even tastes different. That real water from a spring or a deep cold well carries something no lab has ever replicated. Not just minerals, not just temperature, life. And sure, maybe that's nostalgia talking. Maybe it's the sound tricking your brain, making you imagine a sweetness that isn't technically there. But maybe not. Because when you hold that glass, heavy, cold, fogging in your hand, and take that first slow sip, something in you settles too. The noise fades, your shoulders drop, and you remember that once, before the world was engineered and regulated and dehydrated and streamlined, a cup of water in a glass was a moment of peace. No screen, no ping, no approval score, just that round, soft, impossible sound of water falling into glass, and you, being still enough to hear it. A place where the ground still breathes. They don't give directions to this place. You hear about it the way people used to hear about secret beaches or hidden trailheads from someone who heard it from someone else. A name passed like a password, a gesture on a map, vague and slow, with the warning, don't go unless you're ready to feel it. No coordinates, no tagged photos, just a whisper. The ground still breathes there. It's not a myth, it exists, though maybe not on the maps you trust. The walk to get there is longer than you'd expect. Not far in distance, but in silence. Every step peels away another layer of noise, signal noise, memory noise, the hum of the always-on world. Until, eventually, it's just you, and the air, and something beneath your feet that feels alive. You don't see it at first, it's subtle, no dramatic fissures or glowing moss, no ancient trees with sacred roots, just ordinary ground. Covered in slow, coarse grass, dotted with stones, a small clearing surrounded by the kinds of trees that haven't had their names spoken in decades. But the longer you stand there, the more you notice. The way the wind doesn't just pass, it lingers. The way the soil gives slightly beneath your weight, not soft like mud, but responsive. The way everything is quiet, but not empty. More like waiting. And then, if you're still, if you kneel down, place your palm against the earth, breathe out slowly, you feel it. A rhythm, low, deep, unmistakable, like the planet itself is taking a breath, in and out, slow, patient, measured in centuries, not seconds. People used to talk about the earth like it was a body, with rivers as veins, forests as lungs, stone as bone. It was metaphor then, poetic, romantic. Now it feels literal, because here, in this place you realize, the ground isn't just holding you, it's listening. It remembers everything. The fire and the frost, the feet that ran across it as children screamed and laughed, the hands that planted and the hands that buried, the wars, the songs, the silence after. This land, this small forgotten patch, never got paved over, never got scanned, sorted, or zoned. No vertical farm, no solar vault, just time, time to settle, time to pulse, time to breathe. Some say this is what the whole world used to feel like, that before the skin of the earth was covered in concrete and noise, you could feel this almost anywhere, in open fields, on mountaintops, in forests at dusk. But now, places like this are rare, sacred, not because of magic, because of memory. You don't talk while you're here. Words feel wrong, too thin. Instead, you sit, or lie down, you put your hand to the soil, and you let it remind you what it means to be part of something older than grief. And when you finally leave, because eventually, you have to, the air clings to your skin, your footsteps feel too loud, the noise of the world feels too fast. But something in you has shifted, you carry the breath with you, you don't tell everyone where it was, you just say, I found a place, and if they're quiet long enough to really listen, you might show them the way. The stranger who knew too much, you didn't plan to meet them, no one ever did, they weren't famous. They didn't give speeches or sell guides or live stream in front of old ruins. In fact, if you passed them on the street, you might not even look twice. But for those who encountered them, the moment never left. It usually began with something small, a question, a lost path, a misread sign. Maybe you wandered into a quiet cafe that wasn't listed on any map. Maybe you asked for directions in a place where no one had spoken out loud in days. Maybe you were just trying to find a place to charge your pack before the rain started. And there they were. Not young, not old, not fashionable, not disheveled, just there, like they had always been. Like they had stepped out of a different time, but hadn't bothered to make a fuss about it. They didn't ask for your name. They already knew it, or more unsettling, they didn't need it, because they started talking about things they shouldn't have known. About your favorite song, from when you were a child. About the way your mother used to braid your hair. About that one moment, the time you stood under the old iron bridge alone, watching water carry away the last yellow leaves of fall. Details you had never told anyone. Memories you weren't sure you still had. They spoke like a lullaby. No urgency, no drama, just truth, unwrapped and laid bare, like warm bread on a table. You should have been scared, but you weren't. Because somehow what they said made sense. They told you things about the world, not just what it was, what it had been. The quiet patterns beneath the noise, the things people had forgotten, not because of war or famine or code rot, but because it was easier to forget than to feel. They said the trees used to hum, that light had more than 7 colors, that laughter, real laughter, could bend the air around it, like heat, that there were towns where no one locked their doors, because the wind would tattle if a stranger walked by. You asked how they knew these things. They smiled, just slightly, and said, because I stayed awake while the world fell asleep. You didn't know what that meant. Not exactly, but you felt it. They spoke about rivers that changed course, just to confuse the maps. About children who could hear the mood of the soil. About languages made only of silence and blinking, and the way you tap your fingers when you're nervous. They told you how the stars used to feel closer, not brighter, just closer. That on certain nights you could look up and feel your own breath matching the rhythm of the sky. And still, somehow it never felt like a lie. Their words didn't make you want to run, they made you want to remember. They said there were places, still, where the old world hadn't quite let go. Rooms that echoed with things that had no speaker. Forests where the wind hadn't learned the new rules yet. People, scattered and quiet, who still dreamed in analog. Before you could ask where, or how, or why, they would change the subject. Ask you something instead, something harmless. What did your grandmother smell like? Have you ever listened to the sound a spoon makes in a real ceramic bowl? Do you remember the way it felt to fall asleep next to someone breathing beside you, not behind a wall or a call, or a filter, but there, their warmth reaching you like a quiet tide? They didn't stay long, that was the rule. The encounter would end as strangely as it began. A shift in the light, a bell ringing in the distance, a sudden cold breeze, though the air had been still all day. You'd blink, and they'd be gone. No trace, no bill, no record on the cafe's system, no mention in the surveillance scrub. Gone, but not really, because you'd walk away with something new or old, a sound in your head you couldn't name, a sense that your bones had been rewound slightly, a memory that wasn't yours, but now felt like it had always belonged. You'd walk home slower, you'd notice more. A leaf caught in a corner, a crack in a wall shaped like a bird, the way the wind sounded when it touched metal. You wouldn't tell anyone, because how would you explain it? A stranger who knew too much, not about everything, just about you, and the world before, and the version of you that had once lived in it. The walk you were never meant to take. It didn't start as anything important, just a walk, a decision to keep going instead of turning left like you usually do. A moment where something in you tired, maybe, or just curious, said, what if I just kept walking? You weren't supposed to take that path. Not really. The old signs were gone, the guide rails faded, and the last time this route showed up on the city's navgrid, half of it was marked unreliable terrain, whatever that meant, but it wasn't blocked, not officially, just forgotten. So you went. At first, it felt like nothing. A cracked pavement trail with weeds curling at the edges, the faint smell of rust in the air, a few chirps from birds that hadn't yet agreed to go extinct. You thought maybe you'd turn around in 10 minutes. Just a stretch, a break, a way to feel something that didn't buzz or blink or ask you to confirm a capture to proceed. But 10 minutes passed, and you were still walking. 15 more, and the city began to blur behind you. The hum, the scaffolding, the efficiency, all softening. You crossed what used to be a footbridge, its rails broken, but its bones intact. A memory of a time when people used to walk together, on foot, side by side, without ear inserts or half-shielded visors between them. Then came the trees. They weren't tall, not yet, but wild, untrimmed, undocumented. Branches that reached like they still remembered how to hold wind. The path thinned, then faded. You checked your pod, no signal, just static and your own breath. You should have turned back, but you didn't. Something kept tugging. A quietness that wasn't empty, but full of something you couldn't explain, like a song you'd heard before, only backward, or a smell you remembered from a room you never lived in. Your pace slowed. You stepped softer. The dirt was damp here, spongy. The air smelled like copper and old leaves. You passed a fence, nothing behind it but a single crumbling stone, maybe a marker, maybe not. You looked at it for a long time. It felt rude to ignore it. Further in, the light changed. No clouds, no shift in the sun. Just different, warmer, somehow, thicker, like it had weight. You breathed deeper. You remembered, for no reason at all, the taste of cold apples, a radio playing through a window, a dog barking 2 blocks away, and the way your feet sounded on gravel as you ran. Things that weren't happening, but that you could feel as clearly as the wind against your jaw. And then, you saw it. A gate, old, iron, twisted with vines, not locked, just waiting. You hesitated, not out of fear, but out of reverence, because everything in your body knew, this was a walk you were never meant to take. This was a memory you had no right to touch. But you were already here, and so you stepped through. Inside, it wasn't a forest, not a field, not a ruin, just a space, a kind of clearing made of silence and scent and shadow. You looked around, no signs, no data stream, no overlays or help menu, just you, breathing. It felt like someone had been there before you, but not recently, and not in a hurry. Maybe they had sat in that spot over there, where the grass was still flattened. Maybe they had left something in the wind, a story, a wish, the last verse of a song no one sings anymore. You didn't need to do anything. The walk had already done the work. You stood, you listened, you felt the air move, not around you, but through you, and something in your bones whispered back, I remember this. I don't know how, but I do. When you finally turned around, the path behind you didn't look the same. It had softened, as though it too had changed. Or maybe it was you. You walked slower on the way back. You didn't check your pod. You didn't take pictures. You didn't speak. Because some walks aren't meant to be documented. They're meant to be felt, to pull you out of time, to remind you that your body is older than your memory, and that some places, some forgotten corners of the world, still know your name, even if you forgot it. And maybe, just maybe, that walk was waiting for you all along. When the fence finally fell, no one really remembered why the fence went up in the first place. Maybe it was meant to keep something out, or maybe, like most fences, it was really meant to keep something in. A temporary measure, a line drawn in panic, the kind of decision made in a single afternoon by someone far away, behind polished glass and recycled air. It wasn't meant to last, but it did. For years it stood, rusting slowly at first, then faster, as the world beyond it changed. The panels were once bright and new, smooth metal, humming softly with warning, signs that blinked and buzzed and spelled out in 3 languages, no entry, do not cross. Restricted for your safety. People listened. At first, there were stories, of course, whispers passed like contraband. Some said it was the edge of the old world, that everything past it had been erased, burned or buried. Others claimed there were still people out there, forgotten, chosen to vanish. The kinds of rumors that flicker quietly between kitchen counters and encrypted threads. But in time, even the stories got tired. The fence became part of the background, just another line on the map, a boundary you didn't question, like a rule written in a language no one spoke anymore. Then one day, without fanfare, without explosion, without even the sound of machinery, the fence simply fell, not all at once. It started in the northeast quadrant, just a few panels, slumped like weary guards at the end of a shift. No sparks, no drones, no alerts. The warning lights had long since gone dark, their batteries forgotten. A breeze moved through the space like it had been waiting for this moment. And then nothing. No announcement. No council declaration. No emergency meeting. Just open sky and a hole where certainty used to be. People didn't rush in. Not at first. They stood at the edge, watched, waited. Some touched the broken metal, as if to confirm it was real. Others tossed stones through the gap, half expecting them to vanish. But the stones just landed, softly, like they belonged there. Then came the first footprints. A child, perhaps, or someone who had grown tired of being told where the edge was. They stepped through, slowly, almost respectfully, as if walking into a memory, and nothing happened. No alarms, no bursts of light, no punishment from the sky. Just a path leading into a place no one had walked in decades. It wasn't empty beyond the fence. That was the first surprise. It was green, wild, but alive. Vines had reclaimed what had once been gravel. Trees leaned gently across forgotten roads. The air smelled different, thicker, sweeter, not perfect, but real. You could feel it in your teeth when you breathed it in. Someone found a bench, still standing, covered in moss, but unbroken. The word home had been carved into it long ago. Someone else found the shell of a building, windows gone, but walls intact, a chair on its side. A mug still sitting on the shelf, half dissolved, as if it had been waiting for someone to finish their coffee. It was like walking into a paused moment, and then came the others. Quietly, in small groups. They didn't storm the gap, they wandered. Some left offerings at the base of the fence, stones, feathers, an old photograph in a plastic sleeve. Some stood with their hands on the rusted frame, eyes closed, whispering names they hadn't said aloud in years. No one knew who gave the order to dismantle the rest. Maybe there was no order. Maybe people just started taking it apart, one bolt at a time, until the line between here and there was gone. But something shifted that day, not just in the land, in the people, because the fence hadn't only separated places, it had divided time, what was before, and what came after. And now, with the last piece lowered, with the wind moving freely again between the trees, the world felt whole, not healed, not fixed, but no longer split. Someone planted a seed there, right where the fence had stood, not for symbolism, not for show, just because the soil was soft, and they had a seed in their pocket. Days later, it sprouted, a single green stem, reaching up toward a sky that no longer buzzed with warning. And for the first time in a long time, people crossed the threshold without fear, to see what was left, to see what might still grow, to remember what it meant, not just to be free, but to be allowed to wander again. That's what falling fences do. They let the world breathe in places it had forgotten how to. And sometimes, that's all you need to start something new. The memory that was waiting for you, it didn't rush. It never does. The memory didn't leap out of the dark like a flash or a sound or a warning. It was patient, slow, like something left on a windowsill to warm in the sun. It waited, because that's what real memories do. They don't vanish. They don't scream. They sit quietly watching you from behind the curtain of your own forgetting. You found it by accident. Or maybe not. Maybe you were always meant to find it. All it took was turning down the wrong hallway, or the right one. A door left slightly open in an old building that shouldn't have still had electricity. A breeze that carried a smell you hadn't felt in years. Something like chalk dust and warm paper, or cut grass in early spring, or the ghost of a radio playing in the next room. And there it was. Not a place. Not exactly. More like a presence. A space that hummed at the edge of your mind, just beyond what the eye could see, but close enough for your skin to notice. It wasn't dramatic. There were no voices, no flashbacks, just the shift. Like something small, impossibly small, realigned inside you. Like a gear that had been stuck finally turning again. And in that turning, the memory opened. It wasn't sharp, not anymore. Time had softened the edges, blurred the faces, replaced certain words with silence. But the feeling, the weight of it, that remained. You remembered the weight of a hand in yours. The way a wooden step creaked differently at night. The sound your shoes made on linoleum. A laugh that rose from the back of someone's throat and made you feel, for just a second, like nothing bad could ever happen. You remembered something that made no sense to the world you lived in now. The feeling of being known, not tracked, not watched, not scanned or verified, or added to a thread. But known, like your favorite color, even though you never told anyone. Like the way your voice cracked when you lied. Like the face you made when you were about to cry but didn't want anyone to see. The memory waited until you were ready. It didn't fight you when you ignored it. Didn't vanish when you got distracted. It stayed, quietly glowing in the room of your mind, where old stories sleep. And when you finally stepped into that room, when you finally let yourself look, it didn't accuse you of forgetting. It didn't ask why it had been left so long. It just opened its arms, because it had always been yours. Buried maybe. Tangled, covered in years of other people's noise, but never gone, and the moment you accepted it, something inside you eased, not because everything was okay, not because the world was fixed, but because you had found something real, something unbroken, inside yourself, and that was enough for now. You walked out of that room, different, not better, not worse, just more you than you had been when you went in. The memory came with you, it didn't speak, but you could feel it, trailing just behind your shoulder, resting in the rhythm of your steps. And every once in a while, when the light hit just right, you could see it in your reflection, not as a ghost or a glitch, but as something whole, something true, something that had been waiting all this time for you to remember. You were always part of the before. You probably thought you weren't, that the world before the silence, before the blinking blue warnings, before the plastic-filtered wind and memory-safe cities, had nothing to do with you, that it was all gone before you arrived, that you were too late, too young, born after the doors had closed, after the fences went up, after the archives were sealed with magnetic keys and time signatures no one could decrypt. But you weren't too late, you were never too late, because the before isn't a date. It isn't a year on a crumbling tag or a corrupted file buried 3 terabytes deep in a dead satellite's cache. The before was always in you. It was in the way your fingers hovered over real paper and didn't quite know what to do, in the way you paused when someone made eye contact, just a little too long, in the way music made you feel like you were remembering something instead of learning it. The before was a language your body still spoke, even if your mouth had forgotten the words. You see, the world before didn't disappear, it just went quiet. It went underground, into forgotten gardens, into buildings with vines curling through the cracks, into half-spoken lullabies your grandmother used to hum without realizing where they came from. It hid inside stories passed between strangers during power flickers, inside recipes saved not because they were efficient, but because they reminded someone of a smell that made them cry. It was always here, waiting. You were born into the after, but the before lived in your blood. You carry its echoes every time you notice sunlight where it shouldn't be. You repeat it when you speak to animals without expecting a response, or when you sit in silence just to hear what silence sounds like. You're not an outsider to it. You are its continuation. You are the last verse of a song that started before the sky filled with wires. You are the one who woke up in a room full of screens and said, "Something's missing." You are the reason the stories survived. You're why they still exist at all. Because even when the world forgot how to breathe, even when it traded oceans for filters and memory for speed, you still looked at the rain like it meant something. You still paused for birds. You still cried over books. You still wondered why your dreams looked like places you'd never seen. And that wondering, that's where the before still lives. It lives in curiosity, in kindness, in long walks with no destination, in asking questions that don't have answers. You were always part of the before, even when you didn't know it. Even when the world told you to forget, and now you've remembered. You've followed the paths, you've stepped through the rusted gates, touched the old walls, listened to the ghosts who were never really ghosts at all, just parts of yourself waiting to be heard. You've felt the texture of forgotten laughter, and the shape of stories that don't need endings to matter. You've walked through every chapter, and now, you're here, right here, at the end. Only it isn't an end, not really, because remembering isn't about going backward. It's about carrying the past forward in your own hands. It's about planting seeds in the cracks of this strange, buzzing, over-filtered world. It's about finding stillness where noise used to be, about choosing meaning when everything else chooses speed. It's about waking up tomorrow and making something softer because you finally remembered how. The before lives in you now, not just in memory, but in choice. So go on, choose to remember, choose to care, choose to wonder. And when the world around you moves too fast, when the lights blur and the messages stack and the news loops like a trapped bird, breathe, close your eyes, and listen for the before. It's still there. It always was. It always will be. And now that you remember, it won't ever be alone again. Thank you for walking this path with me. If you made it all the way to the end, take a deep breath. You've earned it.